This weekend, we meet with the midpoint of the fall season, and this really begins the journey into the darkest quarter of the year. It's the journey towards the winter solstice, and between now and the midpoint of the winter season, we have some of the longest nights of the year. And this is a time of year where we find ourselves naturally called within, a time to spend time in reflection, introspection, listening to the wisdom of our soul, listening to the dreams and the desires of our soul, nurturing them, nourishing them, and allowing ourselves to create a beautiful, solid foundation so that as we step into the spring season, we can begin to birth them in our lives. Hi, I'm Lori Andres. Welcome back, my sacred friend, and welcome to this episode of the Luminary Life Podcast. Today, as you can tell, we are going to dive into some conversation about the energy of this time of year, some things you can begin to lean into. And then we're going to talk about a couple beautiful rituals to honor the midpoint of the fall season. And that is actually on November 1st. Now, in so many different traditions, this day is celebrated. My upbringing, we regarded All Souls Day and All Saints Day, a very Catholic celebration. But there's also Halloween and the Day of the Dead. There's Samhain, that point of the mid-season. It's such a beautiful time to lean into the rhythm of the earth. Now, there's a lot of conversation around the ways that this energy is felt. And one of those big themes of conversation is around the veils between worlds thinning. And I think, this is something that's always felt really beautiful and quite mystical when I would hear it and lean into that energy. And it always resonates as a lot of truth, that it carries a lot of truth, and is something that is quite helpful as we begin to enter or cross the threshold really into these final weeks of fall. The fall season, in my mind, and the way I organize it from a creative process and creative rhythm and flow to the ways that I work with it energetically, is I see two things. The first half of the fall season I see as a time where we are harvesting. We are gathering up all the gifts and the abundance that has been created through the planting that we did earlier in the year. So this harvest is such a sacred time. It feels lively and active, and there's a lot going on, a lot happening. But then as we meet this midpoint, there's like a threshold that we cross, and that threshold brings us into a journey within. It kind of feels like a descent towards the winter solstice, towards that dark night of the year. And that descent calls us to be reflective. It calls us to let things go. Now, when I look at this from just the what's happening in my world sort of perspective, I look at my own gardens. And Chris and I have really robust gardens, not vegetable gardens, but flower gardens. And I noticed that the early half of fall, they're beautiful. They are full of flowers and bright and vibrant. But then as we hit about this time of the year, all of the extra parts of the plants, after that big push with the bloom and the cold air begins to set in, they begin to withdraw their energy, they slow down, and the plants themselves begin to die. And so part of the activity in the garden shifts from enjoying the flowers to cutting down all of the dead plants and bringing that to the yard, the city yard for composting and being used for other things, right? And so this cleanup piece, I feel like the second half of the fall season is a lot of letting go, cleaning up, like reevaluating, looking at what has been working, what hasn't been working, Where did our harvest surprise and delight us? Where did it disappoint us? Where did we fail to plant the things we most wanted to harvest? Yeah. When we sit back and let ourselves in that cleanup, reevaluate, we can begin to notice really objectively and with a tender heart of presence and awareness, notice what's been working and what isn't, and how we can begin to shift and just reconsider and listen a little bit more closely. So as I was leaning in to prepare for this episode, I came up with just a couple different messages that came through. And, one of the big things about crossing this threshold is that I feel like there's an element of remembering, a remembering of self. And, I think sometimes we get caught up in the whirlwind of life, and summer definitely brings a wonderful whirlwind of activity and joy. And as we lean into the second part of the fall season, we're reconnecting with the very core of who we are. This is part of that re-evaluating, that reconsidering, that looking at where did we have the courage, or where did we hold back? Did we plant what we wanted? Did we refrain from planting what we most wanted? And why? And that "and why" is so important, because here during this season of remembering what was most important and we decided not to do, we get to reconsider why did we hold back, and was that valid? Is that valid going forward? Is there something there that needs a little extra love, a little healing, a little inner soul work, a little exploration? And what is that? And letting ourselves delve in so that we can really cultivate the courage that we need in the coming season, in the coming year. Coming season, probably not quite right? Because we'll be moving into winter. But as we make a shift, we're going to want to be ready to and prepared to bring that next piece to life. This is also a time of year that's really supportive for deepening our faith. Whatever your faith looks like, however you define that, describe that, experience it, this is a time of year to begin deepening your faith and your trust in the divine. To trust that the divine has your back, to trust that you are supported in your path, to trust that your vision and your ideas are really coming from a deep place of authenticity, and that they are in alignment with your soul's, with your soul. And that bringing those to life is not only a dream, it's inevitable. And as we sink into this time of letting things go, releasing, there's space being created to deepen our sense of faith, our sense of trust in the divine, our sense of inner knowing that Spirit is with us. Spirit is supporting us. And I think this time of year, as we go through that place of creating space, we're also creating a new foundation for the coming year. So I talked a little bit about how we want to deepen into a place where we find and cultivate the courage to plant the seeds we want to plant in our lives, to plant the seeds that we want for not only ourselves, but for humanity, to plant the seeds that we want to create a robust harvest. So part of, what we're doing as we're deepening our faith, as we're deepening our trust in the divine and trust in our own knowing, our own rhythm and timing, our intuition, we are creating a more stable foundation, and we're creating a sacred container to hold the vision, to plant the vision that is within our hearts, that we're here ready to bring forward. I feel like this time of year is reminding us that Spirit, the universe, the divine, wants to give us something bigger and wants to support us in our expansion. And the question is, have we created the foundation? And so this foundation being our faith, our trust, our belief in the divinity and divine's ability to support us. The other thing to know about this season is that it tends to bring forth a lot of emotions. Emotional energy comes to the surface. We have things that we remember that maybe we didn't fulfill in the way we thought we would have. We have recall of dreams that we've left unfulfilled. When we evaluate our harvest and we begin to recognize that we didn't even have the courage to plant the seeds for what we really want. We all do this. When we have that awareness surface, it can bring up a lot of emotion, especially for those of you who recognize yourself as highly sensitive or empathic. You recognize that when you begin to reflect, it often triggers a lot of emotion. And I think this is really, really helpful. I think emotion is an incredible catalyst for helping us to focus in on what has been missing and how can we begin to shift and grow and find the courage, really cultivate the courage to claim what we're wanting. And when we do that, yes, becomes so easy. It becomes so natural. And it's something that creates an incredible momentum moving forward. The other piece that I feel is, really important to lean into a little bit more here, and I kind of began with my conversation about letting things go from the garden. This piece of letting things go. This is the season to let things go. And we can look at that from the literal place of what within our house needs to be reorganized and what needs to be let go of. We can look at it from the emotional perspective of what emotional stories and beliefs have we been carrying that are ready to be released. What ideas and perception of our own limitations have we been telling ourselves and telling others that have been keeping us from planting the seeds that we want to plant, from bringing into form what we want to bring into form? This reflective energy supports us in not only looking back and witnessing and seeing and acknowledging what's been happening, but it invites us into the place of truly doing the work to release, to let go, to offer ourselves compassion for the ways that the stories and the ideas and the emotions we've been carrying have really served us, to have incredible compassion around that. And then to challenge ourselves to let that go, to no longer carry it, and open up space for a new story to be written. Now, I think this is one of the critical pieces here. It's not just about opening the space, but it's about allowing ourselves to write a new story. What is the new story you're ready to write for yourself? And how can you reclaim your power? How can you claim your power in that new story as you open it up, as you open space for it? Yeah, I think this is, this moving through, crossing this threshold in the midpoint of the fall season, I think is such a potent time of the year, and one where the most essential work happens with regards to bringing our hopes, dreams, ideas, and visions into the world. I also think that this is one of the places where a lot of us miss. We overlook, we avoid, we move, kind of jump past, we skim over. And this is the place where if we give ourselves permission to really delve deep, to really harness the momentum that is already here, things open. Yeah, things open so fast. And we can really rewrite our story in a way that is truly empowering. How beautiful is that? The last piece around this season that I'd like to delve into actually leans into the ancestral energy that's present. Now, earlier I shared that energy of the thinning of the veils between worlds, between the physical and the spiritual world. And when we lean into that energy, there is the presence of our ancestors and the journeys that they've taken. And I think this is, to me, this is the time of the year to really lean into honoring the journey they had, the experiences they had, and the ways that their life created space for your life. And, I think sometimes this can be really challenging because some of our ancestors maybe had some pretty shady experiences, and we may not look very fondly upon them, or we may have had interpersonal challenges of great depth with some of them. But there's something about their life. Their life allowed you to have life. It opened the space for you to have life. And as we just acknowledge that piece, as we hold space for that, we let go of all the other pieces around that to the best that we can at this point in our journey, because we're always reflecting on that. It's always a part of us, right? But the more we can allow ourselves to honor the life that they had and acknowledge that piece, honoring the ancestors, we are creating space to create the new story. And we're allowing them to be at peace in whatever way that is, for whatever part of their journey they're on. So as we look at different seasonal practices and ways to honor this season, I think it's really important that we bring that in. So when we lean into that part of the conversation today, when we lean into some rituals for this time of the year, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But there's one other piece I want to circle back into with regards to the bridge, the thin veils between the worlds. And, I talked about that from the perspective of the physical and the spiritual world. But there's also the thinned veil between the world of where you are and where you are going, what you're creating. And when we lean into that energy, not only do we have an opportunity to get a glimpse of spirit, to remember the depth of spirit's presence and support around us always, we have an opportunity to glimpse a vision of the life we long to create and begin to bridge this point in our lives with what it is we are creating, to actually activate it so that it begins to take form and that we are in alignment with it. This is where I just love to work with clients and within the sanctuary. I think this is something that I feel like we are doing in an ongoing way. We are journeying in deep within and allowing ourselves to really explore many different pathways between where we are and what we're creating. And that includes a whole lot of different facets in our lives. And I think that's pretty amazing. So I want to invite you, as you're leaning into the next couple of days from Halloween through Samhain, let yourself really enjoy this energy, this midpoint energy, and what it is opening for you. Okay, so now let's sink into some conversation about how we can actually celebrate these days, how we can lean into the energy and allow it to be supportive, and also acknowledge what has been complete. So the first thing I have on my list of rituals here is what I call the all-day burn. I know it probably sounds funny, but this one is rooted in something that Chris and I do every year during this time of the year. We pick a weekend, a gorgeous Saturday or Sunday. We get up early, we light the fire in the fire pit, and we tend to it all day, as we work in our garden, cleaning and clearing the garden. So there's this super practical aspect to it, right? But then woven within that are all these little sacred moments of reflection and conversation about what has been and what it is we long for. We allow ourselves to weave that into our conversations. We allow ourselves to pause at the fire, offering gifts and like different offerings to the fire, offering intentions. So that can look like we gather things up from the garden and we use our breath to blow or exhale the essence and energy of what it is we're releasing into it and then offer it to the fire. And the same is true when we have a glimpse of something we're longing for. We allow ourselves to do the same thing. And this becomes a day where we're just kind of meandering through the day, meandering through togetherness, and allowing the fire to be tended, the fire of release, and letting ourselves just release and release and release. You know, sometimes this will be conversations about where we've had tension, where we have struggled in our journey, where we are finding ourselves repeating something over and over and over. And it's through the art of acknowledging and through the art of attending to this fire and letting ourselves release it that we allow things to go, to be released. It's a really beautiful practice. Other ways that you could do this, because I get that this is not practical for everyone, but here's some other ways that you can do it. You can simply have a small fire for a shorter period, much shorter period of time than all day. And you could write things down that you're releasing and place them into the fire. If you're in a place where you cannot have an open fire, you could light a candle and let yourself sit with the candle. Part of this is about tending the flame, the internal flame of fire, letting that be active and warmed and strengthened during this dark point of the year. You know, when we think about the dark quarter of the year, this like dark channel that we're moving into or moving through, there's a question about how do we navigate darkness? How do you navigate darkness? Whether it's a situation that's challenging in your life, how do you navigate that? Or whether you're navigating the actual, window of the season. How do you navigate darkness? And tending to a fire, whether it's a candle flame or a big old, bonfire in your yard, how do you tend to that? How do you travel it? How do you navigate it? How do you allow it to support you in navigating the darkness in life? It is natural to go through challenging situations and periods and experiences. It's natural. And leaning in, letting ourselves have space held, letting ourselves tend to our own inner flame is really wonderfully helpful. Okay, the next piece that I have here is about honoring our ancestors. Yeah. You can look at your like familial ancestors, and then there's also the ancestors of the land you live upon. I mean, there are so many layers of ancestral lines that can be acknowledged and recognized and honored during this time of year. One of the things that I think is really helpful in this process is just creating a little altar, like a photo altar with your ancestors. And sometimes we don't have photos that are printed out anymore. I know I don't have them like I used to, but you can simply write down names and let yourself just lay them out. Create a little altar to acknowledge your ancestors. And you may be thinking, well, I can't even think of them all, or there's just too many to count. Great. What are the ones that are in your awareness right now? Who is showing up in your thoughts? Grandma, great grandma, grandma's, cousin. Who's there? Who's there? Who's in your thoughts? And then let yourself write those names down and add them to an altar. and just add some things there that acknowledge your ancestors. It could be that you're putting, a beautiful plant there, or you have some seasonal items that you gathered from nature. Chris and I have been on a mission to gather pine cones, and I feel like that is definitely something tied into my ancestry. So letting yourself, gather up what are those natural items, and then place those on the altar as well. Let yourself honor your lineage. You decide how long that altar stays active. This can be a beautiful thing to keep all year round and really spend even more time with during this season. But feel into what is aligned for you. And then the third practice that I have here is about just giving your altar in general a refresh. Give it a refresh. Yes, let yourself refresh your altar. Refresh it for the change in season. Refresh it to reflect the energy of release and letting go and creating space. Shift it to reflect the entering of the new crystal ally of the month, which is going to be lapis for the month of November. I'll be coming out with some stuff on that soon. Let yourself lean in. How does your altar want to be refreshed to reflect this new season or this midpoint of the fall season? How does it want to be honored and shifted? And let yourself just lean into that even more. Okay, last thing that I think is really helpful, and I think this works well into either or both of the altars, the ancestral altar, your personal altar, and that is to add a bowl of water with a little salt, sea salt, or, cooking salt is great too. Add some salt, let it be dissolved, and place it on your altar. This is wonderful for the energy of emotion that surfaces during this season. Yeah, it will help you to process the emotions that show up. In particular, the energy of grief. We talked about this earlier, how grief can really show up during this time of the year. And part of the reason that grief shows up is because we begin to reflect and recognize the places where we didn't live what we wanted to live, where we failed to plant the seeds we wanted to plant, or maybe we just took an entirely different direction. But one of the things that's so beautiful about that is that if we're still living, we still have a chance, an opportunity to look at how perhaps that wants to live now, if so, and to acknowledge that and recognize that the journey we took was exactly right for us. There are a lot of layers of emotion around that and conversation that we could have, but letting yourself just place just a little small bowl with some salt water on your altar will really support you with whatever emotions show up, and in particular with grief. All right, so with that, I want to share that I do have all of the details scheduled now for the 2026 crystal forecast, and I would love for you to sign up to join me. I'll put the link down in the show notes, so check that out. If you are new here, thank you for joining me. I want to invite you to subscribe. I want to invite you to leave a comment, or if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or another listening place for podcasts, please leave a review. I would love that and so appreciate it. It really is helpful in growing these channels and allowing others to connect, create community. It's such a beautiful way to connect. And if you've been listening for a while, thank you, thank you, thank you. It is an absolute joy and delight to connect with you through these conversations each week. All right, so sign up for the 2026 crystal forecast that's coming up in December 7th. And I think that's all for today. I want to wish you an absolutely beautiful day. And as always, sacred friend, shine brightly. Bye for now.